My name is Ramune Norkute. I'm from Lithuania. I work in a company, Idea Code, and we are focused in user experience research and design. My personal experience in IT is over 10 years, but focusing on just user experience and usability as such, I started in 2006 with Idea Code. And initially what we did a lot of usability testing, analysis. Then we gradually moved to designing products. First, that was design in a narrow sense in just designing the interfaces. Then we kind of progressed to looking at the surrounding environment, more focusing on service design and things like that. And what happened this year is actually that we got a chance to work with a startup idea that's going to, I would say, in a bit different direction, maybe to a next level of user interface design. It's called natural user interfaces. So basically, this is what I'm going to be talking about today. So first of all, generally, the presentation is going to have two parts. The first focus will be on the concept itself, because I'm not sure how many of you know what the natural user interface actually means. Could you raise your hands? Who knows? Okay. Okay, so it will be an introduction to kind of get the overview. And then we'll talk more about the product that we worked on, kind of like a case study to show some examples. So now, to start with the definitions, a simpler question. How many of you have still remember how to use a DOS command prompt? Okay, great. So everybody can relate to that. And remember how nice it was when you no longer needed to enter the text commands when Windows came out? You just had the menus that you could click on. At least if you're not programmer. If you're a programmer, maybe you still like command prompt. You never know. But generally, what I'm trying to say is that Windows basically changed the paradigm of user interface. Instead of being just text commands, we still have now windows, menus, icons, and we have a mouse as a device that you use to point and click on things that you want to select. So that's the current paradigm we're in. But when we talk about natural user interface, it's actually different. It's a new paradigm in a sense that we no longer have the clicking device, to put it simply. Basically, we're designing and talking about interfaces that allow you direct manipulation with the information, with the content. And basically, how this new paradigm works is that the interface is supposed to feel natural to the user. From the beginning, you start using it, up to becoming a real expert in it. It is not supposed to require a lot of learning, and it just has to be kind of feel like an extension of your body, basically. And that's how the good natural user interface is defined. And basically, to illustrate this, the best picture that I came up with is the following. Remember how Master Yoda could manipulate things, lifting them up and flying them around? So it feels as a natural extension of the body. And it doesn't have to be just hand motion. Natural user interfaces can be controlled by full body movements or voice or facial emotions or different things. The most well-known things commercially that you've all seen and probably tried is Microsoft Kinect. That's the one with body and hand movements. Then there's also Siri on iPhone, which is basically a natural user interface that is using voice for control. But you still don't have any menus. You're just interacting with Siri as if that was another person. Also, there is Leap Motion's 3D sensor. Probably some of you have seen demos. It's a device that you place in front of the computer, and then you can just move your hands around to manipulate the objects on screen. It's not yet commercially available, but there are a lot of videos about it, and it's supposed to come out in the beginning of next year. So these are the standard examples, but then there are also people who say that all the touch devices are natural user interfaces. Let's say that iPhone or iPad touch interface is also a natural user interface because you're not using a mouse. And that's kind of a bit of a controversial topic because if you're just mapping the standard graphical user interface onto a touch, you're just adapting buttons and menus so that they're big enough to click. But it's not a really big redesign in the paradigm sense. So it's kind of hard to call, let's say, any iPad application a natural user interface application. But there are some attempts to do it. For example, some of you maybe have used Claire on iPhone. That's a task list application, very simple. But what it does is removes any menus from the application. Basically, you're manipulating, even though it's touch, you're manipulating the screen. So you have to pinch to get the new list, and then you have to drag a bit to add an item. And you can kind of drag to the side to get it, to have it completed or deleted. So in a way, this is the direct manipulation of the content that kind of allows us to call it a natural user interface application. So the big question is, how do we make this user interface really great and natural for the users? It sounds very fantastic, but in the real life, when you have to try and do it, it's not that simple. Primarily because for usability and UX, there is a lot of research. There are standards that you can apply, but for natural user interfaces, it's still very early, and there is not a lot of research. But generally, there are some principles that experts are starting to agree on, and I've just pointed out 4 of them. Basically, the first thing is that it has to be intuitive and natural. Intuitive in the sense that when you see a new application, you're supposed to naturally pick it up and just learn by doing. And this whole learning experience is supposed to be fun and entertaining in a way. So naturally, that applies a lot to games, and that's why natural user interfaces like Kinect are really picking up. Also, another couple of concepts is that you have to understand the domain where it's going to be used and the context requirements. And these 2 items are really similar to what we are talking about in our daily UX work, where we have to really understand the context well to design a good application. But in our daily work in the graphical user interface applications, we are working with 2-dimensional space. It's a flat screen, and there is time dimension as such. In natural user interface case, since we are not using the pointing devices, we're, for example, using our hands, the context gets more complicated because we have 3 dimensions, we have time, and we can also have different modalities. So you have to understand basically and keep in mind more things when designing natural user interfaces. And then the final I usually call it the most fun thing is that what the guidelines are saying for natural user interfaces is that you have to forget everything that you knew so far. In the GUI design, we have design patterns. They help us to design things in a way that users already know from previous experience. In natural user interfaces, you're told to forget about this and try to develop a new kind of interaction. So now let's move to an example of what we've been doing. Basically, those examples that I mentioned, especially Kinect, is an example of where you have to use an external hardware for the natural user interface to work. What we try to do is put this basically to design a software that would potentially turn any device like computer or mobile device into a natural user interface. So the software is called TLV Play, and it's installable on a computer, and it uses a web camera to track your hand movements. So basically, without touching the screen or without touching the keyboard, you can you can make some actions with your hands over a distance. And when we were, it's kind of balancing on the border of whether it is a good fit or not fit in terms of context, because usually it is said that entertainment and social contexts are very good for natural user interfaces. Again, that's where Kinect fits in. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to move this idea into the desktop environment a lot. And usually it is considered that office applications are pretty good right now with the GUI for individual users to be productive. So we're kind of balancing on this here, trying to see whether it can help users optimize and augment some of the tasks that they are doing. And the two contexts that we mostly found the most useful here is one where you have to quickly make an action without switching the screens. For example, I'm working on a document, but at the same time I'm listening to music over the headphones. And I don't want to switch the screen applications to find where my media player is to stop the music. So I could just use a hand gesture to stop it, then to start playing it again, or I could just scroll to the left or to the right to skip between tracks. That is one of the contexts. Another one is where you're a bit further from the screen and you're kind of too lazy to reach back for the keyboard or for the mouse. So, for example, when you're browsing pictures or when you're reading an article or a longer document, you could just use the hand to scroll down the page. These were the contexts that we would think this fits best. And that's why the media and browsing app icons are up there on the screen. The current demo is actually working on these applications. So now I would say the most interesting part for the UX designers is how we try to create this new interaction concept, because we're supposed to forget how the GUIs look throughout all the menus and help user manipulate the objects directly. And we ended up with 3 concepts. I'll start with each one in turn. The first one shows a concept where this icon would be shown on the on the desktop, as kind of reminding of the standard menus a bit. But the idea is that you're first showing your hand, and then this more complex picture appears, and then you can move your hand towards the direction that interests you most. So if you choose the middle option, you can pause or play the media player. If you choose to go left, you go to the previous song. If you choose to move to the right, you move to the next one. It's, in a sense, is the closest to what we have in the menus now, because you still have options to choose from, but it's just controlled with a hand. Now, the second concept that we came up is consisting, here you can see 2 images, and the first one is the bigger one on top, is the one when you show your hand. It's trying to tell you that you're showing your hand at the moment, but you have options of moving to the right and to the left. And once you make your choice, movement, then you get the second smaller icon telling you what action was performed. And this is the concept we ended up using for the moment, but it's not necessarily the best one. So that's why I'm showing you all the options. And then the third option is just a kind of a sign language for computers. You can have a gesture that says stop or play, and then you have gesture like this or like that, showing that you want to move between tracks. There is a product on the market that's actually using this concept, but in terms of general standards and guidelines, in our opinion, it can potentially turn into a very complex sign language. So basically, you would have to learn a new sign language to communicate with your computer. So that said, that's why we, for now, stuck with the second option. So basically, to summarize how it works at the moment, is that first you're showing your hand, and from the camera, there are two directions where the computer can read the hand gestures. So first you show your hand, and then you get this display with icons where you can still keep your hand to pause and play, or you can move to the right to the next track, or move to the left to the previous track. And this is the progress so far, but we're not saying that this is a perfect solution. It's just kind of still on trial basis. And these are the main problems that we're still trying to solve. So basically, the problems being that, first of all, when I show the hand as a user for this whole thing to feel natural, I want the computer to actually quickly recognize it. So basically, it's very important for the system to know when I want to start and end my gesture. And it's quite complicated technology-wise to do it for the moment. Also, the second problem is forgiveness and prediction, in a sense that when we are showing gestures in 3D, there are all different ways of how each gesture, even from the same user, is different every time. For example, once I could make a gesture like this, and then I'm still meaning the same gesture, but it kind of looks a bit like that, or a bit like that. And it's already, and the system has to be flexible enough to understand that this is different, but I meant the same thing, so kind of forgive me for the error. And the last thing is unfamiliarity, is from the perspective of the user, no matter how hard we try with all the icon design and communication, there is still a long way to learn how to actually make this clear from the first time. Let's say the first time you show your hand, something pops up on the screen, and you're a first-time user. And you have to be able to understand what the system is actually telling you to do. So that's the thing we are struggling with. So that's it for the overview, and the demo, unfortunately, we could not load it on this computer. We didn't want to mess up some things for other speakers because it's using the camera live. So if you would like to check the demo, you can download it at this address, or just approach me during the break and we can show you how it works. Thank you.